Mr. Speaker, just before we adjourned, I was asked the question, what will be my response to Honorable Madam Gail Teixeira? And I thought it fit that I told her then that draconian times demand draconian measures. I want that to be recorded here, specifically because that is what the exigencies of the time demand, draconian measures.
I like that.
Mr. Speaker, even the People's Progressive Party know that there is today a global war on terrorism, and that we cannot in any way distance ourselves locally from that global set of initiatives being taken by countries all across the world, especially what we regard and call the liberal. And one big policy behind this initiative or sets of initiatives is preventing the emergence of what is called safe havens for terrorists. The prevention of safe havens must then mean, at the national level, we dissuade any potential terrorist from ideas of thinking that they can have a place to reside. And that is what this bill seeks to do. This bill will be a challenge to all of us, because I know this side of the aisle and that side, there are very many of us that have come from a human rights background, whether we be lawyers, whether we be politicians. But that's the challenge in these times. And I have heard from members on the other side what it is that we have to do in relation to the criminality that has seen an upsurge in our country, and some of the draconian measures that we have to take. And in any event, we must be measured and cautious in what we do. But when it comes to terrorism, which is by far a more serious offense, and then all the other related offenses surrounding it, we have to be extraordinarily determined that we must not have terrorism cultivated in our territory. And that is why I rather suspect that even when this bill was in the cabinet of the PPP's government, they too had to conjure up these ideas of how, what activity will be an offense and how definitive they must be in relation to the sentencing of those activities. We can prevent the emergence of these safe havens through a variety of ways. And we are not in any way inventing the wheel here, because other countries which have suffered at the hands of terrorists have passed through and rode through that journey, as it were. But we have to ensure that this kind of safe haven is not created here by virtue of ensuring that we prevent recruiting, we prevent training grounds, and we operationalize whatever might be the potential cells that can be formed. We also must see the need to prevent the financing of terrorism, because without money, the terrorist can't go any distance. And that is why it is necessary that that also be an important aspect of preventing and dissuading. We also have to create offenses and have draconian sentences for those offenses for those who aid and abet these activities. And that's what this bill does. So it is our policy as a government, and I'm certain it was a policy of the PPP government too, to strengthen our capacity in a matter of such vital national, regional, and international security. Terrorists exploit ungoverned areas. They take sanctuary where the laws are lacking and where there is a lack of policing and a will to police. We must not allow that in this country. We must not allow that set of deficits to be exploited by these terrorists. And what we are doing here by this act is merely denying terrorists that sanctuary that could be potentially here in Guyana. We are emphasizing through this legislation to the modern liberal world, especially our friends like the ABC countries. Yes, and we are friendly with them. We are merely emphasizing through this legislation to the modern liberal democratic world that we are not a rogue state. Understand that we are not a rogue state. We have to show consensus on the condemnation of terrorism the world over, which threatens democratic nations like Guyana, in the region, and even outwards, South America, Central America, United States of America. Because, Mr. Speaker, what terrorism does is to challenge democratic values. That is what it does. And I will come to the point just now made about when we have to deal with extradition and the political character of extradition and so on, to meet the argument of my learned colleague, Mr. Rohi, that indeed it takes on a political flavor, largely, this terrorism thing. Because, as the studies have revealed, the radicalization that sends them into that extremism is one to do with cultural values, of having rights, of living the free life, women in equality, free vote at regular elections. All of those things are touched. And so it has inherently, in the attack of our liberal democratic order, a political flavor being assailed by these terrorists. And to that extent then, one is not saying that because of that political flavor, we are going to attack back with draconian measures as these politically. No. We are a constitutional democracy, and we must rebut by virtue of what is called a legal order. And the legal order, as well known to this country, has to do with the making of laws in an institution that will be deliberative as this Parliament of Guyana. And that is why I like what I see, the debate, very good points by members across the aisle, but we have to make a consensus ultimately. And this is very, very important. In that consensus, we have to ensure that the fundraising of terrorism, the money, the property that they can own and buy guns and all the other devices that this bill talks about, is halted. We have to deal with questions of the falsification of documents that can see terrorists moving easily across national territories. We have to commit to fight the battles in all its facets. Because, you know, Mr. Speaker, when they have that capacity, terrorists and all those that aid and abet them, those who can be in illicit drug running, illicit arms and ammunition running, all of that. They can intimidate the legitimacy of the state of Guyana. And to that extent then, that intimidation must be nipped in the bud by virtue of certain measures taken that is consonant and consistent with what happens the world over. Mr. Speaker, this kind of democratic measure that we are taking, and it is because of the fact that we are in a deliberative institution, duly elected not too long ago, means that we have to, in a sense, combat it through certain policy decisions. We have to cooperate on border control to scrutinize the flows of illicit goods and these terrorists. We have to cooperate and exchange information at the national and international intelligence agencies about those who are suspect and all of that. We have to. We have to have technical and security cooperation with the big countries that are far more advanced than us in relation to matters dealing with terrorism. We have to have information for the clearance for transfer of suspects and to distinguish them from refugees. Because we can have situations where persons are coming as refugees and because of certain attributes we want to associate them with terrorism, we have to make that kind of distinction. And this bill, to a large extent, go towards statutizing, if I may use that word, that set of policies. And it is important then that this bill be supported. I feel, and just to respond to the comment made just now, it does affect me personally, yes, the death penalty. I have always argued against it. But as I have said just now in my opening report, the draconian measures are needed. Because, and even the argument has been made by members over there, that for murder you must be hanged. Although, quite frankly, over there never hanged anybody, not that I know of. But it has a dissuasive effect, as I said. And that is important, because when people feel that they could terrorize in accordance with the provisions of this act and not be hanged, it may not have that preventative, dissuasive effect. And it is important then that this right that we do have in the Constitution, the right to life, although we do have the penalties of death, it brings straight home to me the necessity of this collision course being, in a way, hard to respond to. It is. It is not a contradictory. But the members over there, in certain legislation that they passed, also passed almost in identical terms these in some years ago. All right, you're going to hear from our learned Attorney General. You're going to hear, because you seem to become a Rip Van Winkle.
Recently awakened from his slumber.
Now, Mr. Rohi, so it is, if I may say, Mr. Speaker, it is not as wicked as Madam Gail Teixeira is indicating. I wish to address some of the challenges.
The Honourable Minister is referring to Honourable Gail Teixeira.
Yes, Honourable Gail Teixeira.
And Honourable
Mr. Rohi.
Clement Rohi.
Yes, that's right. Honourable. And they were very honourable this evening, I must say. You did not, and thanks very much for that, because I am certain this is giving you trouble just like it is giving us trouble. Mr. Rohi, in the challenges he enunciated, has indicated a very important one that we have to be mindful of, and that is the resources that will be required in relation to ensuring that this bill is implemented to its full effect. That's true. Literally, having so many offenses, having literally a brand new regime in relation to our criminal law will require lots of resources. The technical training and cooperation that we will have to enter now with the overseas countries in relation to matters of dealing with terrorism will require resources. Top quality policemen, police recruits, training overseas, and here, all of that. Better facilities probably to detain these terrorists so that their brethren do not come to break down a jail just to get them. Top security facilities will have to be created and all of that. Oh yes, I agree with him. But that does not necessarily mean that we must not pass this bill because we have a lack of resources to ensure its implementation. The dissuasive effect of it alone has merits in relation to its passing, rather than saying that because we do not have the resources, we must not pass it. Well, the insinuation might have been that, but if you did, well, I withdraw that then. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, the human rights issues. The human rights issues will always be whenever we are creating offenses under the criminal law. Always. Justice is going to be demanded by even the terrorists. Even they want justice when you catch them. And indeed, the safeguards is always in our law. The Constitution, presumption of innocence. Presumption of innocence is one big such one. The right to counsel. All of them would have those that are inherently constitutionalized in the provisions of our Cooperative Republic Constitution. And so that has not been taken away. And I want it to be understood, Mr. Speaker, that this bill creates new offenses. And in the creation of those offenses, one should not necessarily see an offense to human rights. Because you have to, as I said, in relation to this new global order, where we have this new development of terrorism, we have to do the creation of these offenses at a national level before we can have investigations, prosecutions, and convictions. But it must not be seen that because we are making new law and making new offenses, it necessarily means that what will follow automatically means abuse of human rights. No. Of course, there can be abuses, but just like in our existing regime of Criminal Law Offences Act, where we saw at Lenora Police Station, police burning the genitalia of little boys, we can still have that. But that don't mean that we must not pass the bill. And so, to the extent then that, yes, it could be very good for those who may want to give it a flavor that human rights abuses might occur inherently because of the creation of new offenses, it does not necessarily follow. Similarly, I must commend former Minister of Home Affairs about the argument that our borders are extraordinarily porous. Yes, genuine geographical nightmare we have there. But without these brand new offenses, we are having some problems as right now because of a lot of guns coming in through the two countries to our west. and lots of bad characters, in a sense, coming through those porous borders. But that's the existing reality. That is something that we have to do to strengthen so as to avoid more and more of the bad people bringing in bad objects from. And so it is important then that that also not be sufficient reason for not wanting to pass this bill. Because our porous borders will remain. It's a long border. But because the border is porous, necessarily follows that we must not pass the bill. It couldn't be logical, neither could it be right, nor could it be just. And so it is important, Mr. Speaker, that though these are genuine concerns, from a person that I know that have genuine concerns on matters like these, indeed, we still ought to, when weighing the balance here, come to the conclusion that yes, indeed, this bill should be passed. And of course, we do something of having greater surveillance on our borders with Venezuela, Brazil, and Suriname, and even in our Atlantic coast. We have to. And the resources will have to be found, and we have to get aerial surveillance. We have to strengthen border patrol, policemen on horsebacks. It is important. A lot of people laughed when we talk about horses. But one of the best ways of getting that border that is so porous for some of you over there is to get the horses and patrol and get speedboats and metal boats and all of those to ensure that we get the borders surveilled properly and protected. And I agree with him too that a strategy is required, and we are working on a strategy. We must work on a strategy, and it is important that all of this be done together with, remember the two words that they were critical of, together with the fact that the bill must be passed. Yes, we must find the resources. We must have a strategy. We must ensure that the porosity of our borders is stacked up with at least some surveillance and so on. But together with all of those, we must also pass this bill. I come now to the importance of this bill. As you know, Honorable Gil Teixeira, is that it be passed as early as possible, so that we dissuade. When people feel that it's a safe haven, I hope you're understanding the argument. If more time lapses and they feel it's a safe haven, they're going to come here. Let's get this bill passed and all of that will happen. I feel also that Madam Gale, Honorable Gale, should be asked the question, where does she stand in this bill? I am not so clear as to how clear you are. And it might be a nice headline. Gale says that this bill is a wicked bill. I hope that could be in the headlines tomorrow. A wicked piece of legislation. Look, this kind of set of measures is going to be the hazard of all security-minded lawmakers, always. I remember the Patriot Act of America. I remember a number of acts in England. And indeed, it created a crisis of the conscience, as it were. Yes, it did. Because the liberal democratic order would like to see human rights, would like to see the democracies and all of that. But indeed, if to secure the democracy and the human rights of the majority of the people of the country as against a few terrorists, we have to do this, then let us do this. I recall, and this was in my practice days at the criminal bar, how difficult it was for England. And I the country that we take our jurisprudence from, largely. Although we now go to other territories, India, America, Australia, and so on. But it was always a difficult thing. And they had to make up their minds. And it was from very early. I've gotten the Bible and Criminal Law here, the Archbold, and at page 2335, the editors are indicating how difficult and piecemeal the legislation had to be. So not because we have a bill here, a piece of legislation that might be regarded as wicked now, we will have to make sure that we constantly go back to it to ensure that it is refined and refined further still for the purposes of meeting the requirements of our liberal constitutional democratic order. Imagine, it started off, as the editors say, with an amendment to the anti-terrorist crime bill in 2001. And I think that came as a result of the 9/11. Then this came with another big bill, Crime International Cooperation Act of 2003. Then what they call the Security Something Bill, SOCPA, it's called, 2005. Then the Terrorism Act, 2006. The Counter-Terrorism Act, 2008. Crime and Security Act, 2010. And by the way, this is the 2013 edition. The Protection of Freedoms Act, 2012. Now, the Englishmen knew that there were challenges to all of these very draconian measures. And what they did was to say, we have to meet the demands today. And they passed their law. And then they passed another one to meet another demand. And when, of course, as the British are normally in relation to their jurisprudence dealing with it in that piecemeal fashion, they realized that they had to pass a certain Protection of Freedoms Act, 2012. We might very well have to go there depending on what we see as the product of the implementation of this bill. We might very well. And so, that's how countries make laws to then capture the moment in relation to matters that are going to be violations thereof or not. That's how it must be done. But they did not come to the realization in 2001, bright people as they are, that we must not pass a bill in 2001. No, they passed it. Saw some remedies needed. Passed one in 2002, then one in 2004, 2006, 2008, right up to 2012. I am urging that we in this parliament must have some self-belief in what we are doing. And this self-belief must come from both sides of this aisle, because this bill, as we now know, was found in the Attorney General's chambers by the present Attorney General's chamber as being the handiwork of Mr. Anand. And so there we have basically the argument as to why there must be some harmony. Rohi's bill. But at least it is important, Mr. Speaker, to understand then that there is commonality here. And I was glad when Mr. Rohi was trying to make an argument that yes, we'll support the bill, but these are the concerns. Those are exactly the concerns of this administration. But that does not mean that we must not pass it. And so we have to then urge that we have the passage of this bill in the context of what the provisions are here. Yes, in every democracy you will have disagreements about certain provisions. Every democracy. We pass anything, you'll have arguments for and arguments against. And so, notwithstanding the formidable arguments, it does not mean that we do not do anything. And we allow Guyana being a safe haven. We allow financing of terrorism. We allow porous borders. We do everything. And we just come to halt. It is important then, Mr. Speaker, that we do that. The contents are very clear. The convention offenses, the sharing of information, mutual assistance, the disclosure clauses, and it is important Some people feel that we are now doing a wrong thing by going the great leap of rendering. I believe that sometimes it is necessary that when certain information comes from another country that a person is a suspect and a known one, that the extradition process is an extraordinarily lengthy one. And so you can do a transfer. If you feel that that is wrong, well, fine, I could understand your argument. I really understand your argument. But if there is need for you to render someone, and even the British have been rendering onto the United States and Europe, certain people who have been committing serious offenses, why not Guyana? Okay, we might want to say that our sovereignty is being violated because there's no reciprocation. But we are exhibiting sovereignty when we say, well, fine, if a Mr. X is being asked for and the information comes to the relevant authority, which largely is going to be Public Security Minister, and you check it through, there is the information needed, you make up your mind, you can send the person. I feel that that is a necessary tool to fight terrorism that we would not want to deny ourselves. So, members over there, please, I urge, and like I started, draconian times demand draconian measures. Thank you very much.